Well, the most profound change in the last 20 years was the fact that so many of these emerging markets grew so much faster than we had expected. The growth wave in China was not necessarily expected to continue. The substantial pickup in growth in the last 10 years in India was almost entirely unexpected. And the cumulative growth of the whole of the Asian region, I think, has really shocked many people. In recent years, we've also seen a growth acceleration in different parts of sub-Saharan Africa, which is raising living standards there. And Latin America has benefited enormously from the rising commodity prices, as well as other ties to the fast-growing East Asian markets. So I think there's the sheer sort of scale and pace of the change has surprised people. And of course, some countries have done better than others. And so whilst we've seen the emerging markets grow fast, there have been differences amongst them simply because some have succeeded better than others. For the Western countries, both North America and Western Europe, I think they have to change their strategy towards the large emerging markets. So much of the language used emphasizes the need for emerging markets to take on greater contributions in global governance, essentially asking them to sign up to further constraints and to contribute more towards global public goods or the solutions to global public problems. And that language sounds fine until you sit in the shoes of a policymaker from India and China, and they ask themselves, what are they getting themselves into? What price are they being asked to pay? And I think there will be genuine reluctance there. I think many of those countries will have to discover the merits of certain types of collective action or unilateral action on their own. So in the case perhaps of climate change, discovering the virtues of energy efficiency is something which is slowly taking hold in India and China, and this will alter how the climate change issue is negotiated and debated. And I think that learning process is something the West could facilitate through dialogue, discussions, to some extent limited technology transfer and the like. And I think that's where the West can have an impact, not in terms of telling emerging markets what to do, because these countries are very sensitive to being lectured to by the West. Instead, highlighting that there are lots of different options, demonstrating the effectiveness, relative effectiveness of some of them, and then hoping and encouraging that logic and self-interest lead to the adoption of much more far-sighted and promising solutions. I'm not so optimistic that the growing strength of the emerging markets will lead to a Europe falling into line with one coherent, cohesive view about how to approach global governance. We have seen so many examples in the most recent years where that simply hasn't happened. When the economic crisis struck, we had a big division between debtor countries and creditor countries. Now with the Russia crisis, we've seen a big divisions between the Eastern European countries and the countries which have other ties which are further to the West. These types of divisions have not gone away. If anything, you would have thought the Russian crisis would have been a good opportunity for Western Europe to unite around a common set of interests, but that simply has not happened. And so I think the omens are not good. If it turns out that I'm wrong, I mean, if something extraordinary will have had to have changed. And this is a pretty depressing conclusion, I think. I think one thing here to emphasize is that for much of the post-war era, it was the determination to never to go to war again and never to confront each other in anything other than diplomatic ways that helped bind a lot of Europe together and provided the impetus for trying to find solutions, even imperfect solutions, often imperfect solutions to problems. But that impetus was there. Now national interest has taken or reasserted itself much more, and the search for far-reaching solutions appears to be less keenly sought, and this is a worrying development. I think in 20 years' time, the sheer scale of China's and India's economies will become apparent. It is quite possible that China will have exceeded the United States in dollar terms, not just in purchasing power terms, in terms of its economic size. India may well have overtaken many of the larger Western countries as well. And I think we will be looking at what some people call a much more multipolar world, where you have growing and differentiated centres of economic activity, vast economic activity. So I imagine we will be talking about a much more heterogeneous group of countries, and this is unusual. If you think about the last 200 to 300 years, we've always had the largest economy of the world being the country with the highest income per head. And that was true when the Americans were on top, it was true when the British were on top. And now we're going to move to a situation where some of the largest economies of the world, in fact the largest economy of the world, will not be a country which has that many rich people in it. It will be a country with a modest per capita income. And that must surely affect how China and India feel they must act on the global stage. They may not feel they could be as generous as a rich hegemon was. And this will have, I think, a big implication for how many international problems are solved, or in some cases not solved. That will be the changing dynamic. It'll be a story more of differences between large economic power blocks. And I think we will think of a world where there is much more rivalry between economic blocks, large economic blocks and their allies around them. And I think that it may be a world which appears to have a lot more confrontation and a lot more uncertainty, but it will also be a much richer world.